Now, the fundamental attribution error, therefore, really relates in an intimate way to the central task of psychology. Psychology is interested in sort of teasing apart the role of personality and the role of the situation, but every individual layperson in their everyday life is trying to do exactly the same thing when they see behavior. We're trying to say, why did the actor do it? What do I learn about the actor? What implications might it have for the way other people would behave? And the fundamental attribution error refers to the fact that people, especially in our culture, make a systematic error, or at least show a systematic bias. We tend to be dispositionists or trait theorists. We tend to think that behavior is a result of the person. And in believing that, and in making that inference, we often undervalue or overlook the importance of the immediate social situation that's impinging on the actor. Now, as long as the situation and the actor are confounded, so when we see a policeman or a teacher, well, their role as policeman or teacher and their personality may be in tune, or at least we don't have to separate them. It doesn't matter whether I think a teacher will behave like a teacher or that a policeman will behave like a policeman because of the person they are or because of the role. I'll be right either way. But we get into a lot of trouble if we suddenly encounter people in new situations, situations when we haven't seen them before. The truth really is that the fundamental attribution error relates to the fundamental mission of social psychology, as I said, which has to do with appreciating the power of the situation. And most of our most famous classic experiments, the Asch experiment and the Milgram experiment and all the other things that students typically learn in introductory psych classes, really depend on this error. It's the fact that we think behavior is controlled by stable traits or dispositions that makes us very surprised when we see that a social psychologist who cleverly arranges the situation can get people to be highly obedient or highly altruistic or highly conforming or even highly destructive and aggressive in their behavior. It sort of shocks us. And the reason it shocks us is that we haven't given adequate weight to exactly the feature of the situation that's responsible for the actor's behavior. Now, the story I often tell has to do with a particular pair of experiences, really, that I had when I first started teaching. One was very straightforward, and that is I was teaching two separate courses, one in social psychology, really humanistic psychology, and at the same time I was teaching a course the next quarter in statistics. And the result was rather dramatic. When I was teaching the course in humanistic and social psychology, people kind of thought I was a swell guy, a warm, empathetic human being who cared about problems in the world and cared about people and was terribly concerned with prejudice and stereotyping and misjudgment. And so they all thought I was very warm and friendly. When I taught statistics, however, they perceived a very different person, and they found me sort of uptight and exacting and concerned with unimportant things like whether people made arithmetic errors, and I insisted that they write the formulas correct, and I was a stickler for notation, so they thought I was kind of an uptight, difficult, cold person. So that was one experience, and we've all had those experiences of interacting with the world in different roles and realizing we're perceived as different people and that folks are getting us wrong, actually getting us wrong in both situations. There's a more concrete incident, however, and that is in my first year I had to defend my dissertation, and so I went back to New York City where I faced a rather difficult, exacting oral examination in those days, and sort of one professor after another fired these very difficult questions at me, some of them quite obscure, and they were sort of smirking and laughing at each other, enjoying each other's fellowship, and it was very unnerving to me, and it sort of said, gee, I don't belong, I'm not one of those guys yet, I can't do that. But then a little later in the quarter, I got an opportunity to be on this committee for a student who was graduating at Stanford, and tables were turned, as it were, and now I was one of the guys asking questions, and all of a sudden it felt like I belonged, and the poor candidates seemed very bewildered. Anyway, I tried to extract the central lesson of that. Initially, a narrow lesson, namely that it's better to be the guy asking questions and answering them, and I did a study of that sort, and I showed that when people are given an opportunity to ask difficult, sort of challenging general knowledge questions of other people. The net result is that they're seen as pretty smart, and the person who's having to answer the questions is seen as less smart. But the lesson was more general than that. It wasn't just about questioners and answerers. It really was about advantaged and disadvantaged social roles, or even more broadly than that, it was just about the power of roles in immediate situational context. And the demonstration, again, the reason that experiment worked is that people didn't make adequate allowance. They didn't recognize how important the immediate features of the situation were in determining people's self-presentation and their success or failure at looking smart.